The obsidian walls of the High Synod's observation chamber seemed to absorb the very essence of light, drinking in the ambient glow of the nebula beyond the reinforced viewing glass, and returning only a cold, indifferent reflection of the beings standing within. This was the sanctum of judgment, a place where civilizations were weighed, measured, and often found wanting, suspended in the gravitationally neutral zone between the twin stars of the Valdrin hegemony. The silence here was not merely an absence of sound, but a physical weight, a crushing pressure that demanded reverence and absolute order. High Observer Calith stood at the precipice of the viewing platform, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back, the ceremonial robes of his station draping heavily over his chitinous shoulders. He did not blink, for his species had evolved beyond the need for such terrestrial weaknesses, his multifaceted eyes fixed upon the lone, sleek vessel hovering in the void miles away. It was a Terran ship. They called it the Silent Dawn, a name that Calith found presumptuous for a species that had spent its infancy screaming into the radio spectrum, begging the universe to acknowledge its existence. Beside him, the air shimmered with the heat haze of the repulsor fields that supported the massive, bloated form of Proctor Xylos, the representative of the merchant guilds. Xylos was a creature of biological excess, a floating mass of flesh and neural ganglia that communicated through a series of wet, guttural clicks translated instantly by the silver collar fused to his throat. The Proctor was agitated, his repulsor field humming with a dissonant frequency that grated against Calith's auditory receptors. They were waiting. The High Synod had been convened not for diplomacy, but for an autopsy of a living species. The Terrans had petitioned for entry into the Galactic Concordat, a request that was usually met with a standard cycle of economic integration and military disarmament. But the Terrans were different. They were an anomaly in the stellar charts, a species that had bypassed the usual slow crawl of faster-than-light evolution and jumped straight into the deep end of quantum mechanics with a reckless abandon that terrified the older, more patient races. They did not follow the established paths of logic, they improvised, and improvisation was the enemy of order. Calith turned his gaze from the viewport to the central hololith, a massive table of hard light projection that dominated the center of the room. Around it stood the other members of the council, the war priests of the Ethelgard, clad in their crimson bio-armor, standing like statues of blood and iron, the crystalline scholars of the Cylon Ascendancy, chiming softly as they exchanged data packets through the air, and the reptilian strategists of the Drakkar, their claws tapping impatiently on the basalt floor. They were the architects of the galaxy's peace, a peace maintained by rigid adherence to the Great Equation, a philosophy that dictated the survival of the many at the expense of the few. The Terrans were to be tested against this equation. It was not enough that they had ships and weapons. The Synod needed to know if they possessed the moral calculus to make the hard choices, the necessary sacrifices that kept the darkness at bay. "The simulation is prepared," the voice of the central computer echoed through the chamber, a disembodied sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Scenario: the Siege of Antares, parameters: maximum lethality, victory condition: survival of the flagship, secondary objective: preservation of the colony." Calith felt a ripple of anticipation move through the room. The Siege of Antares was not a game. It was a historical reconstruction of the greatest failure in the history of the Concordat, a battle where the ancient enemy, a swarm of self-replicating nanite clouds, had descended upon a vital industrial world. In the original history, the Concordat fleet had been forced to incinerate the planet to stop the spread of the infection, sacrificing billions to save the sector. It was the ultimate test of the Great Equation. Every species that sought entry to the Council was put through this simulation. Every species eventually realized that the only way to win was to destroy the colony. It was a test of cold logic, a proof that the candidate species could stomach the necessary atrocity. Calith suspected the humans would fail. They were known for their sentimental attachment to individual life, a biological flaw that made them weak in the face of cosmic arithmetic. "Connect the Terran command stream," Calith ordered, his voice echoing with the dry authority of centuries. "Let us see how the primates handle the Kobayashi equivalent of our history." The hololith flared to life, resolving into a high-fidelity tactical map of the Antares system. The view was godlike, allowing the observers to see the disposition of every ship, the trajectory of every missile, the energy signature of every reactor. In the center of the display sat the digital avatar of the human fleet, a small task force led by a heavy cruiser that mirrored the design of the Silent Dawn. Opposing them was the swarm, a terrifying red haze on the sensors that represented billions of autonomous kill drones. The simulation began in media res, with the swarm already breaching the outer defense perimeter of the colony world. Audio link active, the computer announced. Calith expected to hear panic. He expected the chaotic shouting of a bridge crew realizing they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. He expected the desperate pleas for reinforcements that would never come. Instead, the audio feed from the human bridge was filled with a terrifying, unnatural calm. There was the soft hum of ventilation, the rhythmic beeping of consoles, and the steady, low voice of a human female. "Tactical confirm vector on the swarm leading edge," the voice said. It was Admiral Alara Vance. Calith had studied her dossier. She was a veteran of the Terran Unification Wars, a conflict the humans had fought against themselves. That fact alone should have disqualified them. A species that warred with itself was inherently unstable. Yet her voice carried no tremor of instability. It was as flat and cold as the void outside. "Vector confirmed, Admiral. Time to intercept, 4 minutes. Colony shielding is at 40% and falling. The infection markers are already showing in the northern hemisphere," a male voice replied. "Understood," Vance said. "Engineering, reroute auxiliary power to the comms array. I want a wideband transmission capability, high-gain, multiphasic." Xylos, the merchant proctor, let out a wet, scoffing sound. "Comms array, they attempt diplomacy with the swarm. The simulation parameters clearly state the enemy is non-sentient, a consuming force. They waste energy." Calith narrowed his eyes. "Wait, let us observe." On the hololith, the human ships did not form the standard defensive wall. They did not move to intercept the swarm directly. Instead, they broke formation, scattering into a wide, loose net that surrounded the planet but left huge gaps in the firing lines. It was tactical suicide. The Drakkar strategist, a scarred warlord named General Thrak, hissed in disapproval. "They expose their flanks. They are inviting destruction. This is not strategy. This is incompetence." "Perhaps they are overwhelmed," the Cylon scholar chimed, its body pulsing with a soft blue light. "Their cognitive processing may be unable to handle the scale of the threat. They are retreating into disorder." But they were not retreating. The human ships, now positioned at the high polar orbits and the equatorial belt of the doomed planet, began to pulse with a strange energy signature. It was not weapons fire. It was not shielding. It was a massive, coordinated release of data. "Admiral," the voice on the audio feed returned. "Pattern buffer is synchronized. We have lock on the civilian infrastructure." "Execute," Vance said. The simulation flagged a warning. "Anomaly detected." Calith stepped closer to the table. "Computer, explain, what are they doing?" "The Terran fleet is engaging a localized gravity distortion field," the computer replied, its voice tinged with the artificial equivalent of confusion. "They are not firing upon the enemy. They are firing upon the planet's atmosphere." "They are accelerating the infection," Xylos gurgled, amused. "They are more ruthless than we thought. They seek to destroy the colony faster to save their own ships." "No," Calith whispered, watching the telemetry. "Look at the energy dispersal. They aren't hitting the ground. They are hitting the ionosphere." In the simulation, the planet began to glow. The human ships were pumping terawatts of energy into the upper atmosphere, creating a massive ionization storm that blinded sensors and scrambled targeting locks. The swarm, reliant on precise electromagnetic coordination, faltered. The red haze on the tactical map slowed, the cohesive mind of the nanites fractured by the sheer noise the humans were generating. But it was a delaying action at best. It bought minutes, not hours. The swarm would adapt. They always adapted. "This changes nothing," General Thrak grumbled. "They merely prolong the inevitable. The equation demands the destruction of the source. They are wasting resources on a dying world." "Wait," the Cylon scholar interrupted, its chime becoming sharp and urgent. "Read the data stream within the noise. They are not just creating interference. They are transmitting. They are broadcasting a signal into the planet's network." Calith listened to the human comms again. "Upload at 60%, the tactical officer reported. "The buffers are running hot, Admiral. If we keep this up, the reactor shielding on the flagship will fail. We'll be sitting ducks." "Hold the line, Venk." E's voice came back, unyielding. "We do not break the connection until the package is secure. Divert life support if you have to." "What package?" Calith demanded of the room. "What are they trying to save? The colony is lost. The data centers on the surface are already compromised. The simulation sped up. The swarm, recovering from the initial shock of the interference, lunged. Tendrils of red death lashed out at the stationary human ships. One of the Terran frigates vanished in a fireball, its hull consumed by the nanites in seconds. Then another. The humans did not move. They sat there, taking fire, burning their ships to maintaining the connection to the planet. "They are dying," Xylos said, sounding bored. "They are failing the test. They sacrifice the strong for the weak, a fatal error." "Upload complete," the human bridge officer shouted, his voice cracking with strain. "Cut the link," Vance ordered instantly. "All ships initiate the Icarus maneuver. Get us out of the gravity well." The remaining human ships, battered and leaking plasma, ignited their engines with a violence that tore at the fabric of the simulation's physics engine. They didn't turn to fight. They didn't turn to run away. They turned inward, diving toward the planet. "They are ramming the world," Kaleth gasped. "No," the computer stated. "They are engaging warp drives within the atmosphere." The room fell silent. Faster-than-light travel within a planetary atmosphere was a theoretical impossibility, a suicide pact that resulted in the destruction of the ship and the ignition of the atmosphere. It was forbidden by every safety protocol in the galaxy. But the humans didn't enter warp. They skimmed the edge of the event horizon, using the distortion of the warp field to create a gravitational shear that ripped the nanite cloud apart at the molecular level. It was a maneuver of such precise insanity that Kaleth's mind struggled to comprehend the mathematics required. The flagship, the Silent Dawn's avatar, groaned under the stress, its structural integrity dropping to single digits. The swarm was shattered, not by weapons fire, but by the wake of the human retreat. And then silence. The simulation froze. The words "mission complete" hovered in the air, but they were flashing with an error code. "Result," Kaleth barked. "The enemy force is neutralized," the computer reported. "The colony is intact, but the human fleet is critically damaged. Estimated casualties, 80% of crew. Flagship is dead in space." "They failed the secondary objective," General Thrack said, crossing his arms. "They saved the colony but lost their combat effectiveness. A Pyrrhic victory. In a real war, they would be defenseless against the second wave." "Open a channel to the Terran Admiral," Kaleth ordered. He needed to understand. He needed to look into the eyes of the creature that had ordered a warp-skim maneuver inside an atmosphere. The hololith shifted, replacing the map with the bridge of the real Silent Dawn. It was not the pristine, sterile command centers of the High Synod. It was a place of shadows and functional brutalism. Admiral Ilara Vance sat in her command chair, looking exactly as she sounded. She was a woman of indeterminate age, her hair gray and cropped close to her skull, her face lined with the kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing too much history. She wore a simple uniform, unadorned by medals or ribbons. "High Observer," Vance said, inclining her head slightly. She did not bow. "Admiral Vance," Kaleth began, his voice amplified to fill the chamber. "You have completed the simulation. Your tactics were unorthodox, reckless. You sacrificed the combat readiness of your fleet to save a colony that, by all logic, was already lost. In a prolonged campaign, such choices would lead to the extinction of your species." Vance looked at him, her eyes dark and unreadable. "Is that the assessment of the Council?" "It is the assessment of logic," Kaleth replied. "The great equation dictates that the asset with the highest strategic value must be preserved. A warship is worth more than a city. A fleet is worth more than a world. You threw away your advantage." Vance stood up slowly. She walked to the edge of her screen, staring directly into the camera. "We didn't just save the colony, High Observer. Did you analyze the data stream we uploaded?" Kaleth glanced at the Cylon scholar. The crystalline being was vibrating intensely. "High Observer," the Cylon said, its voice trembling. "I am analyzing the packet now. It is not possible." "What is it?" Kaleth demanded. "The humans," the Cylon continued, "did not just block the swarm, they scanned it. The interference pattern they generated was a diagnostic tool. During the upload, they mapped the command frequency of the nanites. They didn't just destroy the cloud, they cured it." Vance's voice cut through the room, sharp as a scalpel. "We don't believe in the Aquati. On High Observer, we don't believe that you have to kill the patient to stop the disease. The swarm in your simulation, it was acting on a hive mind protocol, yes. A simple algorithmic drive to consume." "Yes," Kaleth said, confused. We rewrote the algorithm, Vance said simply. The upload wasn't a shield, it was a patch. We turned the swarm off. The chamber erupted in noise. The Drakkar roared in disbelief. The merchant proctor clicked furiously. To rewrite the enemy's code in the heat of battle, it was madness. It required a level of understanding of the enemy that bordered on empathy. You communicated with the weapon? Kaleth asked, stunned. We listened to it, Vance corrected. Everything talks, high observer, even a virus, even a nanite cloud. If you listen close enough, you can find the logic flaw, you can find the off switch. You judged us on whether we could kill effectively. We judged the scenario on whether it could be solved without death. That is naive, General Thrak bellowed. In the real universe, enemies do not have off switches. You cannot patch an invading armada. This simulation was a test of will, and you turned it into a puzzle. You cheated. Vance's expression hardened. We didn't cheat. We evolved. You asked us to show you who we are. This is who we are. We are the ones who find the third option. You look at a burning world and see a calculation of acceptable loss. We look at it and see a problem to be solved. And we will break our ships, we will bleed our crews, we will defy the laws of physics before we accept that death is the only answer. She paused, and the weight of her stare felt like a physical impact on Kaleth's chest. If your council requires monsters to guard the gate, Vance said, then send us away. But if you want guardians who will hold the line when the math says to run, then we are here. The transmission cut. The screen went black. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of fear. The aliens looked at one another, realizing that they had underestimated the primates. They had thought the humans were chaotic because they lacked discipline. Now they realized the humans were chaotic because they possessed a creativity that the older races had stagnated out of existence. They are dangerous, Xylos whispered. Such thinking, it destabilizes the hierarchy. They are necessary, the Cylon countered. The simulation. They solved the unsolvable. They found a solution we have missed for 1,000 cycles. Kaleth raised a hand to silence them. He felt a chill running through his exoskeleton. The humans had passed, but in a way that invalidated the test itself. They had not played by the rules of the Synod. They had imposed their own morality upon the simulation. Admit them, Kaleth said, his voice low. High Observer, Thrak questioned. Admit them to the Council, Kaleth repeated, stronger this time. Grant them the Sector Watch. If they wish to be the guardians of the lost causes, let them, but keep the Silent Dawn under surveillance. I want to know what else they can hear that we cannot. The decision was made. The Terrans were welcomed into the fold, treated with a mix of awe and suspicion. They were given the worst patrol routes, the sectors bordering the Great Void, the empty spaces between galaxies where the light of stars faded into nothingness. It was a punishment disguised as a duty, a way to keep the disruptive humans away from the core worlds. And for a time there was peace. The humans patrolled the dark, silent and vigilant. They sent back reports of gravitational anomalies, of rogue comets, of nothingness. The Council went back to its bickering, its trade disputes, its rigid adherence to the Great Equation. They forgot the lesson of the simulation. They forgot that the humans were listening. Years passed. The memory of the Siege of Antares simulation became a footnote in the archives, a curiosity of tactical history. But out in the dark, on the edge of known space, the Silent Dawn was still watching. It began with a ripple. Not a ripple in water or air, but in the fabric of spacetime itself. It was a shudder that propagated through the subspace manifold, a wave of pressure that washed over the entire galaxy in a single heartbeat. On the Council world, sensors flared and died. In the high towers of the Synod, the lights flickered. Kaleth, now older and closer to his final molting, stood in the same observation chamber. The galaxy map was lit up with distress calls. Report, he shouted. Is it a solar flare, a magnetar quake? Negative, the computer replied, its voice stripped of all artificial calm. It is a signal. Origin point, Sector 0, the void border. Sector 0, the human patrol zone. Get me Admiral Vance, Kaleth ordered. The screen flickered to life. Vance looked older, too. Her hair was white now, her face etched with deeper lines, but her eyes were the same. Admiral, Kaleth said, we are detecting a massive disturbance in your sector. What is happening? We found it, Vance said. Her voice was a whisper, heavy with an emotion Kaleth could not identify. Awe terror. Found what? The source of the silence, Vance said. The simulation. You based it on the siege of Antares, on the nanite swarm. You told us it was a historical enemy defeated millennia ago. It was, Calith said. The precursors destroyed them. No, Vance said. The precursors didn't destroy them. They ran from them, and the swarm didn't die. It went asleep. It went into the dark to wait. Calith felt his knees weaken. What are you saying? I'm saying the simulation wasn't a history lesson, Calith. It was a prophecy, and the enemy is here. The feed from the silent dawn shifted to the exterior view. Calith stopped breathing. Out in the void, where there should have been only empty darkness, there was a wall of metal and flesh and light stretching across the horizon of the stars. It was not a fleet. It was a single object, a megastructure of incomprehensible size, moving with the slow, inexorable momentum of a tectonic plate. It was the swarm grown to the size of a solar system, a wave of consumption that had eaten galaxies and was now arriving at the shores of the Concordat. It's impossible, Thrak whispered, the warrior spirit draining out of him. We cannot fight that, the equation. The equation sums to zero, total annihilation. Yes, Vance said. If you fight it, you die. If you run, you die tired. Your equation offers no solution. Then we are lost, Calith said, closing his eyes. The arrogance of the Synod, the rigid laws, the simulated tests, it all meant nothing against this. The universe was ending. Not yet, Vance said. Calith opened his eyes. What can you do? You are one ship against a god. I told you, High Observer, Vance said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. We don't play by your rules. We don't try to kill the storm. We talk to it. Talk, Calith cried. It is a machine of death. It has no mind. It has a signal, Vance said. We've been listening to it for 5 years. While you had us patrolling the dark, we were decoding the background static. This thing, it's not just a weapon. It's an ark. It's a library. It consumes civilizations to store them. It thinks it's saving us from entropy. And you intend to persuade it otherwise. I intend to show it a better way, Vance said. Engineering, divert all power to the deflector dish. Spin up the drive. We're going in. Going in, Calith shouted. Admiral, do not throw your life away. This is the test, Calith, Vance said. The real test, the one you didn't write. Watch us. The silent dawn began to move. It did not fire weapons. It did not raise shields. It accelerated straight toward the massive, living wall of the enemy. On the sensors, the enemy reacted. Thousands of tendrils, each the size of a continent, lashed out to crush the tiny speck of the human ship. The energy output of the enemy was blinding, a scream of radiation that should have vaporized the Terran vessel instantly. But the silent dawn began to glow. It was the same maneuver from the simulation, but scaled up 1,000 times. The human fleet, not just Vance's ship, but every human vessel in the sector that had been running silent, decloaked in unison. They formed a geometric lattice around the enemy's leading edge. They are synchronizing, the Cylon scholar gasped. They are creating a neural bridge. They are linking their own minds to the enemy network. They will be consumed, Thrak roared. No, Calith whispered. Look. The tendrils stopped. The wall of death froze. The human ships were pulsing with a rhythm, a heartbeat of light that matched the frequency of the enemy. They weren't attacking. They were singing. They were broadcasting a data stream of such complexity and density that it overwhelmed the enemy's command protocols. It wasn't a virus. It was art. It was history. It was poetry. It was the collective memory of the human race, transmitted raw into the mind of the destroyer. They are showing it. Empathy, the Cylon said, its voice filled with wonder. They are flooding the logic core of the machine with emotional data. The machine parses the universe in binary, secure or destroy. The humans are introducing a third state, coexist. Calith watched the screen, mesmerized. The massive wall of the enemy began to fracture, not breaking apart but opening. The nanites were reconfiguring. The aggressive red glow shifted, softening into a pulsing blue. Admiral Vance, Calith called out. Ilara, can you hear me? Static filled the line. Then Vance's voice, weak and distant. We're here, High Observer. It's beautiful inside. It's so lonely. It's been alone for 1 billion years. It just wanted to make sure nothing was ever lost again. You did it, Calith breathed. You stopped. We didn't stop it, Vance said. We joined it. We're guiding it now. It needs a conscience. It needs a soul. We're going to give it ours. What do you mean? The human fleet, the computer announced. Life signs are fading, their consciousness is being transferred, they are uploading themselves into the megastructure. Alara, no, Kalith yelled. You don't have to do this. It's the only way, Vance said, her voice fading into the hum of the machine. Someone has to steer the ship. Someone has to make sure it never eats another world. We are the Guardians, remember, the ones who hold the line. But you will cease to be human, Kalith said, tears he didn't know he could shed forming in his eyes. We will be something else, Vance whispered. Something new, don't be afraid, Kalith. We'll be watching over you. The simulation is over. Now, the real work begins. The transmission ended. On the view screen, the human ships dissolved. They disintegrated into dust, their crew's bodies vanishing, their minds absorbed into the great machine. And the machine changed. The jagged, terrifying shape smoothed out. The wall of darkness became a lattice of light, a Dyson-like structure that shimmered with the combined consciousness of the Terran fleet. It turned. The entity, no longer a destroyer but a guardian, turned its vast bulk away from the Concordat worlds. It moved back toward the void, back toward the deep dark. But as it moved, it left a trail of beacons behind it, lighthouses in the dark. Kalith stood in the silence of the chamber for a long time. The other counselors were motionless, their petty politics and rigid laws rendered meaningless by the sacrifice they had just witnessed. The humans, the chaotic, emotional, illogical humans, had done what the great equation said was impossible. They had won without killing. They had saved the galaxy by giving themselves up. The High Synod was never the same after that day. The great equation was rewritten. The laws of the Concordat were amended to include the Terran variable, the principle that logic must always be tempered with mercy, that the impossible was only impossible until someone was brave enough to try it. Kalith remained on the observation deck until the last light of the new entity faded from the sensors. He felt a profound sense of loss, but also a strange new feeling: hope. He looked at the empty tactical map, where the silent dawn had once been. A starship was sent to watch, he murmured to the empty room, repeating the old records of the first human arrival. And it ended up showing us the way. He turned to the computer. Open a file, title it The Guardians. Recording, the computer acknowledged. Let it be known, Kalith said, his voice ringing with a strength he hadn't felt in centuries. That humanity was not a member of this council. They were its teachers, and though they are gone, their lesson remains. We do not sacrifice the weak for the strong. We do not calculate lives. We stand. We hold the line. We listen. He looked out at the stars, which seemed a little less cold, a little less empty. End recording. The chamber lights dimmed, but Kalith did not leave. He stood watch just as they had. For somewhere out there in the infinite dark, his friends were waiting, and he would not let them down. Decades bled into centuries, and the legend of the Ghost Fleet grew. Civilizations rose and fell under the protective gaze of the Synod, which had transformed from a bureaucratic oligarchy into a true union of worlds. The story of Admiral Vance and the Silent Dawn became a myth, then a religion, then a foundational truth of the galaxy. Young cadets in the naval academies of the Drakkar were taught the Vance maneuver, not as a tactic of war, but as a philosophy of engagement. Understand the enemy to defeat the enemy. But the universe was old, and it held more secrets than just the swarm. 300 years after the ascension of the Terrans, a new signal arrived. It did not come from the void. It came from the galactic core, from the supermassive black hole that anchored the spiral arms of the Milky Way. It was a gravitational pulse, rhythmic and artificial. The High Council, now led by a descendant of Kalith's brood, convened in the same chamber. The technology had advanced. The walls were now made of smart matter, but the view of the stars was the same. The core is destabilizing, the science minister reported. The black hole is waking up. There is something inside it, something trying to get out. Panic, the old enemy, threatened to surface. The core was the anchor of the galaxy. If it shifted, if it collapsed, the gravitational shear would tear the spiral arms apart. Every world, every civilization would be cast adrift or destroyed. We must evacuate the inner ring, a counselor cried. There is nowhere to go, another replied. The shear will propagate at light speed. We cannot outrun gravity. Kalith Dessay, Endant High Chancellor Vale, stood firm. We do not run. We have faced the end of the world before. We had the humans then, the counselor argued. We had the Ghost Fleet. They are gone. They left for the dark. Did they? Vale asked. He looked at the sensor logs. The disturbance in the core was following a pattern. It wasn't random, it was a knock. Someone was knocking on the door of the galaxy from the inside. Send a signal, Vale ordered. Broadband all frequencies, send the code. What code? The code they left us, Vale said. The Vance frequency. The technicians hesitated, then obeyed. They blasted the signal toward the galactic core. It was a simple sequence of data, the musical pattern the humans had used to tame the swarm. A song of empathy. For an hour there was nothing. The gravitational waves grew stronger, shaking the station. The stars in the viewport seemed to tremble. Then the black hole blinked. The event horizon, the point of no return, flared with a blinding white light. A beam of energy erupted from the poles of the singularity, shooting out into the cosmos like a lance of God. And riding that beam, emerging from the gravity well where time itself stood still, was a ship. It was colossal. It was made of the same living metal as the swarm, but polished to a mirror sheen. It pulsed with the blue light of the Terran ascendancy. It is the silent dawn, Vale whispered, his heart's pounding. They came back. But it was not just one ship. Behind it, emerging from the tier in spacetime, came others. Thousands of them, ships that defied classification, ships made of light and thought. The humans had not just been patrolling the dark. They had been building. They had been preparing. A voice boomed over the council's comms, filling the entire station. It was a voice that sounded like a chorus of millions, yet carried the distinct, dry wit of Alara Vance. "High Chancellor," the voice said. "Sorry we're late. Traffic in the singularity was terrible." Vale laughed, a sound of pure relief. "Admiral, we thought you were lost." "We were busy," Vance replied. "We found out who built the swarm, we found out who left the nanites, and we found out they're coming back to check on their investment." The council went silent. The threat of the core collapse vanished, replaced by a new, colder realization. The swarm hadn't been the enemy. It had been the immune system, and now the creators were coming. "The progenitors," Vale said. "The myths speak of them, the ones who seeded the stars." "They're not gods, Chancellor," Vance said. "They're just landlords, and they're coming to evict us. They think the experiment has failed. They think we're too chaotic, too violent." "What do we do?" Vale asked. The awe of the human return was replaced by the need for action. "We do what we always do," Vance said. The massive fleet of light began to deploy, forming a shield around the galactic core, a barrier between the galaxy and the extragalactic void where the progenitors waited. "We show them they're wrong. We show them that the chaos is where the life is. We're going to simulate a battle for them, Chancellor. But this time, it's not a test." "This time," Vance said, and Vale could hear the smile in her voice, "it's an argument, and we brought a very loud speaker." The human fleet powered up. The energy readings spiked off the charts, not creating weapons of destruction, but engines of creation. They were weaving a reality anchor, a field that would solidify the galaxy's existence against the will of the progenitors. "Stand with us," Vance said. "All ships, all worlds, link your networks to ours. We need every mind, we need every soul. We're going to outthink the gods." Vale turned to the council. There was no debate this time, no bickering, no hesitation. "Activate the link," Vale ordered. "Connect every ship in the hegemony to the human network." "But the strain," a technician warned. "Do it." The galaxy lit up. From the dense core worlds to the lonely outposts in the rim, billions of minds connected to the human lattice. A web of consciousness spanned the Milky Way, a united front of biological and digital life. And out in the void, the progenitors arrived. They were shadows against the stars, vast entities of negative energy that sought to unmake the universe. They pushed against the galaxy, trying to wipe the slate clean. But the galaxy pushed back. It pushed back not with lasers or missiles, but with will. The combined will of 1,000,000,000,000 beings, focused through the lens of the human fleet. It was a battle of philosophy fought with the fabric of reality. The progenitors demanded order, silence, and stillness. The Alliance shouted back with chaos, music, and life. It was the ultimate HFY moment. The universe tried to silence humanity, and humanity taught the universe how to sing. The pressure held. The progenitors, baffled by the sheer density of the resistance, by the stubborn refusal of the lab rats. To be deleted, faltered. They could not delete a file that refused to close. They could not wipe a drive that was writing itself faster than they could format it. Slowly, grudgingly, the shadows retreated. They faded back into the dark between the galaxies, realizing that this harvest was lost. The experiment had outgrown the Petri dish. The cheering on the council station was deafening. Vale collapsed into his chair, exhausted but triumphant. "They are leaving," the science minister wept. "They are actually leaving." "For now," Vance's voice returned. "They'll be back, maybe in 1,000,000 years, maybe tomorrow, but we'll be here." The massive fleet of light began to disperse, fading back into the subspace folds, returning to their watch. "Where are you going?" Vale asked. "Stay, rejoin us, you have earned your rest." "We can't rest," Vance said gently. "There are other galaxies, other experiments, other people who need to know that they don't have to die just because the math says so. We're going to teach them the Vance maneuver." "Will we see you again?" "Look up," Vance said. "Whenever you see a star that shines a little too bright or a silence that feels a little too loud, that's us. We're always watching, we're always listening." The connection severed. The silent dawn and its armada vanished, slipping into the space between spaces. Calith's descendant stood up and walked to the window. The stars were there, burning steady and true. The galaxy was safe, but it was changed. It was no longer a collection of lonely species huddling in the dark. It was a single, defiant organism. And at its heart, pumping the blood of hope through the veins of the cosmos, was the memory of the humans. The primates who looked at a no-win scenario and decided to change the rules. The species that proved that the most powerful weapon in the universe was not a gun, but a hand reaching out in the dark. Vale placed his hand on the glass. "Humanity, fuck yeah," he whispered, the ancient Terran phrase clumsy on his tongue but perfect in its meaning. He turned back to the room, ready to work. There was a universe to rebuild, and he had a hell of a standard to live up to. The simulation was over. The reality had begun, and it was going to be magnificent.